So Free League just launched a Kickstarter to found a 5e rule variant for the Symbaroum RPG, complete with player's guide, GM guide, Dungeon Master's guide, and a bestiary, so a full set of 3 core rulebooks. But instead of recommending this right away, I will take this as an opportunity to discuss the differences between 5e and the original Symbaroum rule set. So, 5e versus Symbaroum. 5e, which I think most of you will be familiar with, is a D20 rollover system, while Symbaroum is a D20 roll under system. If you are doing a skill check in Symbaroum, you take a D20 and try to roll under one of your 8 attribute scores. That will be anywhere between 7 and 15, which as a GM I prefer, because it means I can just change the difficulty of a skill check by giving a plus or minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I don't have to worry about a difficulty that the players will have to beat. With their roll. It's a small difference, really. But let's go through the 8 attributes. We've got accurate, which you use to hit enemies in close combat and ranged combat, and it does nothing else. And there are easy ways for a character to roll their attacks on the other attributes. Pretty much all of them, actually. And that is part of the build, how you build a character in Symbaroum, that you have some kind of ability that lets you roll on the other attributes for attack rather than accurate, so you can have accurate as your dump stat. But at that point I'm asking myself, why do I have accurate at all? All of my players had accurate as a dump stat. And if it's just there to be replaced, then I think that's total waste of an attribute. That is one of my gripes with the Symbaroum system. Then we've got cunning, which is basically intelligence. We've got discreet, which you need to sneak around, pick pockets, pick locks, do all thieving stuff. We've got persuasive, which is basically charisma. We've got quick, which is basically dexterity, and you use to defend against attacks. We've got resolute, which is some kind of willpower, helps you shrug off adverse spell effects like mind control, fear, and so on. We've got strong, which is not only strength but also determines your hit points. And we've got vigilant, which is like wisdom, because wisdom is mostly used to determine how sharp your senses are. And if you notice, if you're light to notice hidden things, I don't really know why it is called wisdom at all. So vigilant does that. And that's probably a better name for that attribute or ability. Let's go on. Then your character is further defined by a race that gives you modifications on these abilities and traits in D&D. In Symbaroum you have a race that gives you racial traits but no mods on the ability. Some races give you access to abilities. Then we have class in D&D. In Symbaroum you don't have classes. You have like archetypes, but that is more of an example how you can build a character. But actually what your character can do is only defined by the attributes and the abilities you buy. And these abilities are like class features, feats and spells all rolled into one. So get abilities to wear better armor, you get abilities to get more hit points, you get abilities to roll on a different attributes for your attack. Each individual spell is an ability, and so on. So you have a great freedom to build your own character and are not forced into this framework of a class. Then on 5e we've got an AC, armor score to hit, while armor in Symbaroum provides damage absorption. In 5e the GM and the players roll, while Symbaroum is a completely player-facing system. Only the players roll. They roll to attack, they roll to defend, they roll their damage, and if they get damaged, they roll on their armor to see how much damage they actually receive. D&D has lots of spells, while Symbaroum only has a few spells, but with each new module, each new book that came out, a few spells were added every time. So no, the selection is not quite as small as it used to be when just the core book was out. In D&D you've got spell slots, and you regain these spell slots during rest. Symbaroum has a system of corruption, where casting magic corrodes the soul and blackens your shadow. If you cast too many spells, you get stigmata like completely black eyes, runes that do not close, an odor of sulfur, and so on. And if you keep casting spells despite all of these signs of corruption, your character will become an abomination. Basically, a demon will burst out of the character. He becomes an NPC at that point. But this corruption is fresh in every scene. Symbaroum separates an adventure role-playing session into small closed scenes, and after each scene you are fresh with corruption and can cast spells again. This goes into the XP system. You get 1 XP for every scene, while in D&D you have several XP options. I don't like this very much. I find that the milestone system from D&D is way easier to handle as a GM, and I would use something similar if I were to GM Symbaroum again. So in D&D you also got levels, while in Symbaroum you get XP, and with these XP you can buy more abilities. You can't even buy more attribute scores, though there are abilities that give you extra points on these scores. There's a limit on how much you can bolster your character after creating them. Then in actual play, D&D characters have a lot of hit points, so fights tend to last very long once you hit a certain level, while in Symbaroum you only got a few hit points. It's basically your strong score plus maybe a small bonus. and those don't increase unless you get extra abilities that increase either your strong or give you bonus hit points, but they never increase by a lot. So the characters only have a few hit points, which makes combat very fast. But additionally to that, they have a system they call a pain threshold. Basically, if one attack does half of a creature's hit points in damage, the player can choose to roll an extra attack or throw the creature prone. And that extra attack often will kill the creature outright if the player hits again. And if the PCs are hit and they lose more than half of their HP, they can decide if they are thrown prone or if the if the enemy gets an extra attack against them. The players will always choose to be thrown prone, by the way. This system makes combat super fast, which in my mind is a good thing. Also in D&D you've got fast HP regeneration, you're full after a long rest, and even a short rest you can regenerate lots of HP. You also have lots of spells to regenerate HP. While in Symbaroum you've got slow HP regeneration. There are not that many spells that regenerate HP, and healing potions cause corruption, which can be really bad for your PCs. So the PCs will only use healing potions if they have no other options. I like this actually. I don't want the PCs to regenerate too fast after hard combat, and use like natural healing and have a healer that can give them bonus to their regeneration. But it's kind of odd working together with the magic system with the corruption, and the corruption being fresh every scene. Because if you've got someone with a healing spell in the group, they will just cast that spell at the end of the scene, and then their corruption is fresh next scene, and the HP of everyone is fresh next scene, though that changes the dynamic quite a lot. So what I would do, I would change how fast corruption regenerates. Also, like in the narrative of an adventure, if there's an NPC spellcaster, after a scene of heavy combat, the rules will tell you, oh, and no, they have to rest because of the corruption they have accumulated during the scene. But the PCs don't have to rest because their corruption will be fresh. So there's some discrepancy there. That would be quite an easy house rule to make. So let's go to a few peculiarities that are nowhere in this. This 8 attribute system is used by every creature, every PC, NPC and monster in the game, and they all have the same number of scores of attribute points to allocate to these 8 attributes. All the same, from the lowly goblin to a dragon, they all have the same number of attribute points. And your strong attribute is basically your hit points. Very powerful creatures get traits and lots of abilities, so they are quite strong. But my players once fought a giant snake, and I mean truly giant snake, but it didn't have that big of a strong attribute. It didn't have a lot of hit points. So once my players got into close combat, they managed to actually hit it. They went over the pain threshold, did an extra attack, and killed it in one round. Well, it is a bit peculiar, if you ask me. If you're making your own monsters, you have to distribute these attribute points according to the system and then give them race traits and abilities from the system to make the monster. And that can take a long time. While in D&D I would just slap together the most important attributes and then give them whatever cool ability that I think they should have. While in 5e I'm wondering, why are there so many subclasses? Why are there subclasses at all? For example, there is the rogue subclass, the arcane trickster, which is a rogue that can cast a few spells. So it's the same as a rogue that has multi-classed into wizard. You already have a multi-class system. You don't also need the subclasses. And you also got this feat system. Why do you have special subclasses? I think they could replace subclasses completely with just the multi-classing and maybe more feats. Well, that's just my opinion. Anyway, I actually like both systems, but I readily admit that the Symbaroum systems has its problems. And if I were to run Symbaroum, I would probably heavily modify it with house rules. But I love the setting, and I could totally recommend this setting. And if you like the 5e rules, this is a good opportunity to pick up Symbaroum and play it with a familiar and proven rule set, rather than having to work with all the peculiarities and shortcomings of the Symbaroum rule set. That said, there is a lot to like about this rule set. I like how fast it is. I like the flexibility you get through the ability system rather than having a class system. I like that it's completely player facing and that the players do all the roles and I don't have to worry about that as a GM. What I would like to see is a Symbaroum like 1.5 rule set where they address the issues that I and others see with the rule set and do a new comprehensive set of core rulebooks with the Symbaroum rule set rather than 3 core rulebooks for the 5e rule set. Well, Free League, if you are watching this, if you are listening, maybe for your next Kickstarter do a reworked Symbaroum rule set. Until then, thank you for watching and goodbye.